Here's a fact that tells you everything about how insane this production got. To find out if a movie camera the size of a small refrigerator could actually capture a quiet conversation, Christopher Nolan's cinematographer filmed a child reading David Bowie lyrics off a piece of paper. That test worked, and it convinced Nolan to shoot an entire feature film, top to bottom, on IMAX cameras. No other movie in history has done that. Not Dunkirk, not Oppenheimer. This one, and it's called The Odyssey. If you're new here, this is the channel where we go past the trailer and the hot takes and actually dig into how these movies get made, what the numbers mean, and whether the hype holds up. Today we're talking about the most anticipated film of the summer, maybe the year. Christopher Nolan adapting Homer's Odyssey. Early reactions just dropped from critics who saw it before the rest of us. And I want to walk you through what they're actually saying, what the production tells us about Nolan's ambitions, and why this movie is either going to be remembered forever or become the most expensive cautionary tale in modern blockbuster history. There is very little middle ground here. Let's get into it. Quick context if you haven't been following Nolan's career. This is the guy who took a 3-hour movie about theoretical physics and committee hearings, called it Oppenheimer, and walked away with 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. That's not normal. Serious biopics about scientists don't usually behave like summer blockbusters at the box office. Oppenheimer did. So the obvious question after a win like that is, what do you do next? Most directors would take the safe route. Nolan looked at the oldest story in Western literature, a 3,000-year-old Greek epic poem about a guy trying to get home from a war, and decided that was the safe route for him. That tells you something about where his head is at right now. Let's talk numbers because they're wild. The reported production budget sits around $250 million, making this the most expensive film Nolan has ever directed. The shoot took place across 9 locations, spanning multiple continents: Morocco, Greece, Italy, Sicily, Scotland, Iceland, Ireland, Western Sahara, and soundstages back in Hollywood. 6 months of filming. And the cast list reads like an awards show seating chart. Matt Damon as Odysseus, and Hathaway as his wife Penelope. Tom Holland as their son Telemachus. Robert Pattinson playing Antinous, one of the suitors circling Penelope while Odysseus is missing. Lupita Nyong'o in a double role as Helen of Troy and her sister Clytemnestra. And then the gods. Zendaya as Athena. Charlize Theron as Circe. That's before we even get to John Bernthal, Benny Safdie, John Leguizamo, Mia Goth, Samantha Morton, and Himesh Patel rounding out the ensemble. This is not a cast list. This is a cast roster the size of a small country's cabinet. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting from a filmmaking standpoint, and this is the part most entertainment coverage is skipping past. The Odyssey is the first feature film in history shot entirely with IMAX cameras. Every single frame. For comparison, Nolan's previous films used IMAX for select sequences. This time the whole movie lives in that format. That Bowie lyric test I mentioned earlier happened because these cameras are loud, heavy, and were never designed for intimate dialogue scenes. Once the cinematographer proved they could pull off a quiet, close-up conversation, Nolan committed to using them for the entire shoot. That's a genuine technical first, not marketing language. On top of that, depending on which theater you go to, you'll actually be watching a different version of the frame. IMAX 70mm shows the image in an expanded aspect ratio using the largest and highest resolution film format that exists. Regular IMAX digital and Dolby Cinema each crop the image differently. Even 35mm prints are being struck for theaters without premium formats. So this is one of those rare cases where your seat selection actually changes what you see on screen, not just how sharp it looks. The score matters here too. Composer Ludwig Göransson, who also scored Oppenheimer, reportedly built parts of this soundtrack using recreated ancient Greek instruments alongside bronze gongs, aiming for something that sounds like it belongs to the Bronze Age rather than a modern orchestra pretending to sound ancient. Small detail, but it's the kind of choice that either disappears into the background or elevates an entire film, and Göransson has a track record of the latter. All right, let's get to the reactions because early word is genuinely strong across the board, and not in a vague, safe way. Multiple critics who've seen it independently are landing on similar points. The scale is being compared to Nolan's most ambitious work, with some outlets drawing comparisons to a big Broadway-style ensemble epic, given how many storylines and cultures the cast represents. Others are pointing to a specific structural achievement, that despite the massive scope, the film reportedly stays intimate and grounded rather than getting lost in spectacle for its own sake. Performance-wise, a few names keep coming up. Matt Damon is being described as giving one of the strongest performances of his career as Odysseus. And Hathaway's take on Penelope is drawing serious awards conversation. Robert Pattinson's Antinous and Himesh Patel's role as Eurylochus are both getting singled out as standout supporting work. And that's notable because supporting roles in ensemble epics this large usually get buried. Here's a detail I find genuinely fascinating. Multiple reviewers mention that this film contains what they're calling Nolan's first real horror sequence. After 25 years of feature filmmaking, that's a new register for him. Given that the source material includes a cyclops, sirens luring sailors to their death, and various other nightmare fuel from Greek mythology, that tracks. Homer basically wrote a horror anthology 3,000 years ago, and nobody's really adapted it that way until now. The consensus, if there is one this early, seems to be that the film is dense enough to reward multiple viewings and that some individual segments of the story could function as standalone award contenders on their own. That's a strong sign. Early reactions to blockbusters are often generic and safe. These are specific, and specificity is usually a good sign that critics were actually moved rather than just being polite. Now here's something worth paying attention to beyond the reviews themselves. Universal made a deliberate choice to skip social media influencer screenings for this film, relying instead on traditional press and critics for the initial wave of reactions. That's a meaningful signal. Influencer screenings tend to generate louder, more immediate hype, but critic-first rollouts tend to be read by the industry as a sign of confidence in the actual quality of the film, since critics are historically tougher graders. Nolan and Universal betting on critics first suggests they believe the movie could hold up under harder scrutiny. There's also the 6-minute prologue that played in premium theaters months ahead of release, showing Odysseus emerging from the Trojan horse into a full battle sequence. That's an old-school marketing move, giving audiences a substantial preview chunk in theaters rather than just cutting a trailer, and it clearly worked. Advanced IMAX 70mm tickets reportedly sold out in a matter of hours when they went on sale, over a year ahead of the release date. That's an extraordinary amount of advanced confidence for any film, let alone one built around source material most people last read in a high school classroom. Here's a pattern worth noticing if you follow Nolan's career closely. The Dark Knight, Inception, Dunkirk, and Oppenheimer all opened in July. This is now the 5th major release he's put into that exact window. That's not a coincidence, and it's not just superstition either. Nolan has apparently built enough trust with studios that he gets to pick his release calendar, and July has become his answer every time. Whatever data his team is looking at, they keep landing on the same month. But July 2026 is not an empty calendar. 2 weeks after The Odyssey opens, Spider-Man: Brand New Day arrives, and it shares 3 actors with this film. Tom Holland, Zendaya, and Jon Bernthal are all appearing in both movies within the same month. That's an unusual overlap. It puts real pressure on how audiences and theaters divide their attention. Multiplexes only have so many premium format screens, and both films are going to want a piece of that same IMAX real estate. Whichever one holds screens longer will likely benefit from steadier per-theater averages in the back half of the summer. Now let's talk about the part nobody in the press junket is going to bring up directly. This film has to make back roughly $250 million in production costs before marketing even enters the conversation. And marketing on a film this size typically runs close to the production budget itself. Oppenheimer succeeded on a comparatively modest budget with adult-skewing drama and virtually no reliance on franchise recognition. The Odyssey is playing a different game. It has the built-in recognition of the most famous story in Western literature, but recognition doesn't always translate into ticket sales the way IP recognition does for something like a Marvel film. There's also been some early criticism from historians about costume choices that don't match the actual Mycenaean Bronze Age period the story is set in, though that's a fairly normal complaint for any historical adaptation and probably won't move the needle much with general audiences that where does that leave us? Critically, this looks like it's going to land near the top of Nolan's filmography, based on what people who've actually seen are saying. Commercially, it's a genuine open question, sitting between two of the biggest risk factors a blockbuster can face: an enormous budget and a direct competitor sharing its own cast 2 weeks later. My honest read is that the technical achievement alone, being the first film ever shot entirely on IMAX cameras, is going to drive a meaningful chunk of ticket sales from people who specifically want the format experience, not just the story. That's a different kind of box office engine than most blockbusters have, and it might be exactly what a $250 million swing at ancient Greek mythology needs to work. The Odyssey opens in theaters on July 17th. If you made it this far, drop a comment with your prediction, hit or miss, and let me know if you're planning to catch this one in 70 millimeters. If you found this useful, subscribing helps a lot more than you'd think, and I've got more breakdowns like this coming as we get closer to the release. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.